Good morning and welcome to the inaugural Comet Corner session. This is a new virtual series created by the UT Dallas Office of Research and in partnership with the schools across our campus to host chats with some of our notable alumni and hear how they have taken their research out into the world and made an impact. My name is Enrica Ziller, Outreach and Events Manager in the Office of Research at the University of Texas at Dallas. As we move through today's session, I invite you to post questions into the chat box for our guest speakers to answer. Moderating our discussion today is Arthur Gregg, Assistant Vice President for Multicultural Affairs at UTD. Let's listen in as they discuss STEM education, pandemics and policing, geospatial considerations, and reimagined possibilities.
I would like to encourage you to take a moment and reflect on the recent deaths of Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, and Nina Pop, as well as the recent Supreme Court rulings regarding LGBTQ+ rights and DACA. Now let us hear those voices as we work towards reconciliation, healing, and to address issues of systemic inequities, and racial bias. Today, we'll hear about the role of STEM education and its correlation to what is happening in our communities. So to help us examine these ideas, our featured speaker is Dr. William Tate IV. Welcome, Dr. Tate. Later in the session, we'll also hear how UT Dallas is addressing the needs in high schools from Amin Lalani. So welcome, Mr. Lalani. Let me tell you a little bit more about our featured speaker this afternoon. Dr. William Tate IV is a member of the National Academy of Education, past president and fellow of the American Education Research Association, and proud alumnus of UTD's Masters of Arts in Teaching and Mathematical Sciences Education. William Tate currently serves as Dean and Vice Provost for Graduate Education at Washington University in St. Louis, where he holds the Edward Mallinckrodt Distinguished University Professorship in Arts and Sciences. But I hear congratulations are in order. On July 1st, 2020, he will join the University of South Carolina as Provost and Executive Vice President of Academic Affairs. Dr. Tate will hold the USC Education Foundation Distinguished Professorship with appointments in sociology, family, and preventative medicine. Tate earned his PhD at the University of Maryland, College Park. He has served at the University of Wisconsin at Madison as a Anna Julia Cooper postdoctoral fellow in social policy and the William Betty Adams Chair at Texas Christian University. Dr. Tate's professional experiences has led him to research concentration in 4 areas. The first, human capital development in STEM fields. The second is epidemiological models and geospatial applications with a focus on adolescent and child development and health outcomes. Third being social development of youth in the context of metropolitan communities. And fourth, social stratification. We're very excited to have you with us today, Dr. Tate.
It's an honor to be here with you, Mr. Gregg. I'm, if you don't mind, Arthur.
Thank you.
You can call me Bill. I am truly honored to spend a few moments with you to talk about my research. It all started really right there in Dallas, and I think you'll feel a Texas spin, if you will, on the things that I'm going to talk about. I'm going to jump right in for the sake of time.
Awesome.
And let me offer this as some backdrop. My first professional position was in Dallas, in the Dallas Independent School District, where I was a mathematics teacher at Woodrow Wilson High School. And at the time that I took the position, I was a coach as well. And so I had to teach 2 course preparations. One was a course called Life Skills, and the second was a course called Consumer Mathematics. And I shall never forget, because this actually has driven my research over the last 3 decades. I had many students in my class, maybe 40, 50 students per section at the beginning of class. It was a miracle that I was actually even hired. I was an economics major and a math minor, but there was such a shortage of teachers in Dallas that they allowed someone without certification to come in on an emergency certificate. And here I was, this 21-year-old in the early 1980s with 40 or 50 students in each one of these classes. And I remember going to the head of the math department at the time and said, this is very unusual to have this many kids in a class. It's not anything I experienced growing up. And he told me to wait just a couple weeks because most of the kids will be gone. And I said, gone where? And he said, they're just going to be gone. They're going to leave. They leave within the first 2 or 3 weeks of school, and they don't come back. And at that point, I didn't know it, but he really set my research career up. Because from that moment on, I began to be extremely curious about the relationship between schools, communities, and in this case, Dallas, where the city and metropolitan community had embraced telecommunications and desired to be the telecommunications corridor of the United States. And for me as a researcher, I began to see that every metropolitan community across the country desires to be something. And in this case, Dallas was telecom, and I couldn't understand at the time how so many kids could be in two courses, the life skills and consumer math that didn't even involve much algebra or geometry or any advanced mathematics, and actually be able to take advantage of what was happening in Dallas in terms of telecom and engineering and the big science that was emerging in the community. And this mismatch, if you will, between the broader economy and what was happening with human capital became a real interest for me.
Wow.
Now, you're not a legitimate researcher unless you have a theory. That's the way this works.
Gotcha.
So I'm offering to my Comet community and my friends who are looking just a brief conceptual overview of what I've been trying to do over the last 3 decades, what I wanted to make sense of. And if you see the pictorial here, you see something called community and K-12 schooling. There is a relationship between where you live and where you go to school. Even in the context of desegregation orders, you have to have the courts intervene for you to go to school outside of the context of where you might live. And so, but this relationship is either positive or negative. Either there's a great relationship between the schools and the community, or the relationship is not so good. Either the schools fall short of the mark, the community doesn't support. But if it's really positive, what we see is that people leave the community, go to the schools, and almost a great majority of those who are in communities in schools that are working well, those students end up in post-secondary education at places like UTD or really high-end technical schools, or they are able to apprentice into opportunities that are extremely robust in terms of income. And the people proceed along and they build up social capital, or what we call networks, and they're able to move into the workforce, and they learn throughout the totality of their life. And once in the workforce, there's tremendous positive social benefit, right? They have family support, they pay taxes, they have political support. And because these things are hardwired, really strong policies keep people in the same types of communities. They end up back in a very similar community if a positive thing happens. And that cycle continues across generations. And it's an intergenerational kind of benefit if you find yourself in a good situation. But what if you're not in a positive situation? What happens if the relationship between the community and in the schools aren't great? Then conceptually what ends up happening is that those students tend to drop out at higher rates, don't complete, and they have a negative impact more broadly on what we would call, or what we might call social cost. They don't really achieve their true potential. They're not able to contribute in tax revenues in the way we would like to see in normal ways, and they generally are not politically active, and they tend to stay in the same communities. Now, here's where, when I'm talking to my students, I always say it's important for you to understand that most of this is structural. And, you know, there's a great debate that's about structural racism and people don't believe it exists. Well, I don't have time in the few minutes I have now, but I'd gladly take it in Q&A. These things are hardwired by policy. Generally speaking, where you live, long historical policies that have existed for decades and decades and created in ways that it's very hard to jump out of this cycle. So conceptually, that's what I've been thinking about and studying and thinking about it through the lens of STEM. So when I started in the 1980s in Texas, it was feasible to get a high school diploma and never have taken an algebra course. That it was feasible to get a high school diploma and not take chemistry. And what you see in this map is the 1980s math and science requirements across the United States. And the light blue, if you will, are the states that had the lowest requirements. And you see Texas is light blue. So not many requirements there. And I'm sorry, I reversed that. Texas had a lot of requirements, but they didn't require algebra and math. And then over time, you see in the 1980s, more and more states required more and more math and science. By the time you get to the year 2000, all the states in the United States are requiring 4 or 5 science and math courses. Now, why did they start requiring more science and math courses? Because the promise was that if students took more math and science, they would be able to go to college. So there was a big equity push by people like me and people like colleagues at UTD who said, we need more and more people to take more and more science. So imagine the system has a mandate for more and more science across states. This is a hugely important deal. And the promise was more people would actually graduate from college or go to college. Well, let me tell you, in our research, studying the United States over that 30-year period, in fact, more people did not end up going to college. The same amount of people went to college. And there was an unintended consequence of mandating in our system more people to take math and science, but doing nothing else in the system. So for my business colleagues here who are listening, I want you to imagine you have a production function at your job and people ask you to produce more of something, they mandate it, but they don't change anything in the system so that you could actually produce more. They just mandate that you have to produce more. What business or corporation could stay viable doing that? You would never do that in a business. If you're going to require more productivity, you'd have to change the means of production. So what ended up happening was that actually the unintended consequence was that more students actually dropped out as we increased the math and science requirements in the United States. Actually, it was a full 1% increase in the dropout rate for all students who stayed in state. And the greatest observed dropouts happened with Black and Hispanic men, nearly 2 points for Black men and about 2.5 points for Hispanic. Now, for those of you observing, you might say, well, that's not a great amount. Well, first of all, remember, we didn't actually meet the standard we were attempting to do by putting more people into college. It didn't work. And secondly, we increased the number of people who dropped out. So what does it mean to drop out? I told you conceptually there are costs. So let me give you some examples. A 1% difference in dropout or not completing is the equivalent of about 400 murders per year. It's the equivalent of 8,000 assaults. It's the equivalent in 2001 dollars of $1.4 billion per year in costs that we pay as taxpayers into the criminal justice system. So in all the debates we're having now about policing, we need to understand that there are many factors that are influencing who actually might be engaged with the police. And you might not believe initially that something like a STEM requirement might end up being linked to people being involved in the criminal justice system. But point of fact, it does. And the costs are extremely high. So let me give you a case very briefly of St. Louis, and I'm going to have to be very brief. In 2014, the Michael Brown incident happened here in our region, and we had the Ferguson uprising. People don't understand what was really going on in our community at that time, and it's all linked back to some of the things we've just been talking about. So if you look in the state of Missouri, we had one of the highest black-white gaps in terms of elementary school suspension rates in the United States of America. We were ranked #1 in terms of that. And in the school districts, if we looked at the top 6 highest suspending school districts in the United States, 3 of them are in metropolitan St. Louis. Riverview Gardens, Missouri, Normandy, Missouri, which is where Michael Brown was from, and St. Louis, Missouri, are 3 of the 6 highest suspending school districts in the United States of America, according to the Office of Civil Rights. Now, suspending kids from school, as a STEM person, the #1 reason people don't learn math is what? Opportunity to learn. So if you're not in the classroom, you can't learn. There's no time on task. So it's a big deal when people are getting suspended. And suspensions are linked to actually moving out into the criminal justice system. I want people to understand why students were being suspended in 2014 when Michael Brown was killed. In the St. Louis public school districts, there were nearly 4,000 suspensions the year of 2014. The primary reason for suspension was insubordination or disrespect. Now, I could take that back, all the way back into the reasons people will actually have to deal with the police department. It's insubordination, disrespect. There's a language pattern that happens in terms of there's a policing actually in our schools. 1,400 elementary students were suspended that year, 200 kids in kindergarten, and 8 preschoolers were suspended. And the primary reason is insubordination. I mean, you know, I have little kids. I have 2 kids. I had to deal with insubordination, you know, but I don't suspend them, right? You know, you have to manage it. Now, I became curious. I don't know how many people have an iPhone. Take your iPhone out and ask your iPhone, what is the temperature or what's the weather in Texas? Now, we don't have a lot of time, but I'm going to say this. Your iPhone will not give you the weather in Texas because your iPhone has been programmed not to do that. It will give you the weather in Sherman. It'll give you the weather in Richardson. It'll give you the weather in Dallas or Houston or San Antonio or Austin because weather is local. It's the same thing with schools. Now, there's an equation for this map. And that equation that I use to create this map between the relationship between discipline in the school and algebra scores is just like your iPhone. It creates a local weather pattern or a local weather condition. In this case, a local condition around the relationship between discipline and algebra. And this is the state of Missouri. And what you'll see is the only 2 places really in the state, and that's the brownish color, where there's a relationship between discipline rates in schools and algebra scores was in metropolitan St. Louis. In the far left corner, that's Kansas City. In the 2 metro areas of our state, there's a negative relationship. So the higher the discipline rates, the lower the algebra scores. No place else in the state was that the case. If I ran these numbers for Texas, I'm very confident. My hypothesis is that it would be the same. And the fact that we have a relationship between discipline in the school and algebra scores is quite powerful. My colleague here has actually confirmed this in his study, Otis Johnson, that this is a national phenomenon. So this discipline issue, or policing, if you will, in schools, is actually impacting what people learn. Now, I'm going to try to end it up here and say there's a lot of things we know. And I didn't start it off this way, but I'm going to end it this way. Here in St. Louis, we're an elite place for sports. We had a great sports regime. St. Louis Cardinals. We had the Rams, a losing team that left us. But we're a great sports regime. That's a public-private partnership. We had an elite segregation regime. I'm just going to be frank. We organize public-private partnerships to keep people in and out of community. Why can't we create elite brain regimes across the United States of America, where we deal with prenatal care at scale, Preschool has been invested in at a high rate. To my business friends, how many things do you invest in that you don't actually know the quality of? We don't know the quality of preschool. We don't have a consumer report on that. And those are developmental things that are extremely important for math and science. For all the STEM people in the audience, if every kid had health insurance as a family, our STEM scores across the United States would go through the roof. They just don't have it. We know that there's teacher quality disparities. Teacher effects are greater than school effects. I know my colleague is going to talk later about the programs at UTD. Good teachers matter, and they matter at scale. We didn't do anything when we mandated graduation requirements like algebra, geometry, chemistry, physics. We need a robust K-12, K-8 science and math program across the United States. We just didn't do anything to change the system to get the outcomes we need. The funding disparities are transparent. All the people we pushed out of school as a result of some of our efforts to increase cognitive demand in schools of math and science, we need to reclaim them. And quite frankly, it's extremely difficult to learn math and science if there's no grocery stores in your neighborhood. You have to be able to eat. Cognition is foundational. I learned that at UTD in my classes there in cognitive science. If you're not feeding kids appropriately, they just simply aren't going to do math and science well. So I'm going to stop there now and just end it with that. But I hope you get my passion for this.
Wow. Wow. I'm sitting here, I'm writing as fast as I can, trying to take notes. And this is epic. I mean, you have some information here that is mind-blowing, eye-opening. Just a couple of things. One of the questions I wanted to ask, I heard you talk a lot about relationships, cycles, and structure. What can we do to build better relationships between communities and schools based on your experience and your knowledge?
Well, relationships are bidirectional. And what we need, in my opinion, is a recognition by schools that, parents are valuable and the community is valuable, and parents also need to take on that responsibility. In the neighborhoods that are functioning very well, that happens. But there's a reason, and we never really deal with it. In bedroom communities that are very elite financially, often the way people have to work is very different. We learned that in the pandemic, right? The way people work is very different by community. So some of us can stay at home and work from home, or we have great freedom to do what we need to do outside of our world of work. And some of us are punching clocks hourly, and we have to be present. And if not, there is no paycheck. And in communities where we think there's underdevelopment, we've got to figure out ways to work with families that may not have the kind of freedom that you might have if you live in an elite bedroom community. I can name some right there in Dallas area, but I won't. They know who they are. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, that's fine that they have that, but what are we going to do in those contexts where the caregivers may not have the kind of time necessary to get up to the school the way you want? I still think we have to find a way to bridge that gap and make it important. I believe also that parent-related programs in math and science are extremely important as well. And there are some evidence-based practices related to that, reaching out into the community and getting more people involved. Plenty of data about having 2 or 3 adults in your life over and above your teacher and your caregiver that add value to you and are prosocial in terms of the developmental outcomes that we need to try to foster and make happen. And I think that we should be doing that, and that is an extremely important part of what needs to happen if we're going to have young people who are generally underserved be productive.
Awesome, thank you. We have a question that's coming from the audience, and the question is: so, what do you suggest to someone that wants to work or to become a teacher to help bridge this gap? It's a 2-part question, so I ask the first question again first. What do you suggest as someone that wants to become a teacher to help bridge this gap? Any suggestions?
Well, I mean, there are many different kinds of ways to become a teacher today. When I first started, it wasn't this way. Everything was done through a certification program at a university, but there are many community-based programs now that one can become a teacher. I don't want to advocate that while I'm on a UTD channel, but you can clearly go to UTD and
Awesome.
in secondary math and science, and work through the program and become a teacher. There are other entities, though, that are more community-based that allow for that. And I would suggest those, depending on where you are professionally in terms of time and resources that you have to invest. But to become a teacher today is a far more straightforward than it was when I first started, when there was just one pathway.
Awesome. When you were in your presentation, you talked about where you live and where you go to school impacts the person or the students. And the second part to the question was, so how does one approach working in a metropolitan area, which has been blackballed as quote unquote a bad area due to high teacher turnover rates?
Right. So first, there's what you can do as a community member, and there's what you would do if you were a teacher. And we all live in some community or care about one or another. Some of us leave communities we grew up in if we find ourselves with the resources to do so. But I would encourage people to be involved in the local community and making sure that the schools have what they need and that young people are supported. One of the things, and I mentioned this earlier, Arthur, is that we know from research that if young people have 2 or 3 adults in their life who invest in them as mentors, teachers, coaches, just a wide swath of things, the pro-social outcomes are profound. What we have going on at scale is that many young people no longer have that. And so I would encourage people to volunteer and be involved in those kinds of programs as best they can. And if you want to become a teacher, commit yourself, give yourself a 3 to 5 year run, and just jump in and see if you can actually help some young people through education, because it's an extremely powerful tool. We underestimate its power, but it is very powerful. We know from research that a kid that has 3 good teachers in a row, if it's from K through 3, there's nothing, they become inoculated, literally, from low performance. That's how powerful teachers are. So if you could just lock in with excellent teachers in those developmental years of what we would call pre-K through, let's just say 3, and it's extremely solid on the reading and math front. Anything you get after that, even if they're not that great, you're still probably going to be on grade average and make it through. That's powerful.
Yeah.
Very. It's just, so sometimes we feel like we don't have hope. There is great hope, but we have to figure out at scale how we're going to make sure people have access to those kinds of things.
Wow.
We don't have that. In the communities I had in the mapping where it was positive, they won't let teachers teach who aren't excellent. You know, where I live here in St. Louis, they redshirt teachers. You know about redshirting from football.
Yes.
So we invest a sufficient amount of resources in our system so that a first-year teacher, a novice teacher, has to trail behind a veteran who is viewed as excellent for at least 6 months before they're even given a classroom, and that's after finishing teacher certification. So we all know that it's valuable, but the resources required are significant. And I just don't think we have the will or the political capacity to make it happen. And my fear for Texas is that the poverty rates are significantly high. And in fact, I did a count recently. I think that if you counted the number of poor people by definition in the US government census, and then took the next 3 or 4 states and added them together, Texas has more poor people, which historically, they have been on the outside looking in terms of the education equation. And it's extremely important that we remedy that for those people, because they're going to be the citizens right there. They're going to be your residents, and they're going to be the people who are adding value on all those things I had in the initial conceptualization: tax revenue, political support, social capital. It really matters, you know, let's be biblical here, who your neighbor is. Yes. How you define that is extremely important. So if you view them as your neighbor, then go out and do good. It's really that time. That's where we are. Take it theologically, take it scientifically. Any way you want, these things begin to converge that we've got to do better.
Well, and you can imagine that the questions are just blowing up. But I wanna touch on one more thing before we go to our next speaker. This is the first time I've heard anyone connect STEM to policing when we talk about particular Black and brown males. And so your thoughts on the whole concept of prison, pipeline to prison, uh, in context of that's going on. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I gave you just the snippet from the perspective of STEM discipline. There's another chart I didn't show between the relationship between STEM and dropouts. And I alluded to the national phenomenon. So if you drop out, you're likely going to be involved in policing, right?
Right.
Let's just be honest. I mean, dropouts have they generally poor health, and they also have issues with the police. Generally speaking, they find themselves in the criminal justice system. And so I think it's extremely important that we attend to that early on. The reality is, how would I say this? Schooling is a mechanism that is either protective or risk factor. It's protective if you go and you do solid job and you find your way through it, graduate and land in that post-secondary box. It's a risk factor for you if you come and the things we do in it push you out in any way, because the push out is going to take you into the policing and criminal justice function. It starts early when we start suspending kids. Did you notice that they suspended preschool kids?
Yeah, saw that.
What are we doing? I mean, literally, you are setting up a situation where those kids have a record and they're being policed internal in the school. If you go into some of the schools, one of my colleagues did an analysis of one of the districts around here, and the actual placards and posters around the building actually were speaking into these kids in a way that suggested they were criminals. She just documented the pictorial representations in the school. So there's so much happening both culturally and structurally in the schools that we need to get a handle on. And I think that's extremely important. And I would also like to say, from a math science point of view, I'm 100% for more kids learning more math. In fact, we have greater access to math and science than we did in the 1980s. But the purpose of it doesn't have to be for going to college per se. The purpose of it should be understanding, what does it mean to be a citizen or resident of this country? And how do you begin to negotiate using those tools in your citizenship role? That's completely decoupled from our discussions of what we do. And here is where the pandemic comes in. And so now we have people who are really anti-science,
right?
Who are, have politicized it in ways. This is a microbiological phenomenon we're dealing with. And it's not political, it's not Republican, it's not Democrat, it's not independent, it's a microbe. And you need to understand what it can do and what it can do to change your life and the lives of others. So as you might say, it's reasonable for me to protect my neighbor by putting a mask on, because I understand the science behind it. Not because some leader says this or that. And this is what really is why I'm passionate about statistics and science and the like, because I want people to really be able to make decisions for themselves and not be led astray by any political rhetoric at all. In fact, we should let the science guide how we're thinking about these things.
Right.
And so much. Oh, please go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, let me bring in Amin Lalani, who's kind of talking a little bit about what UTD is doing with it. But we can circle back to your point. Let me bring Mr. Lalani in and tell you a little bit about Amin Lalani. He's presently a clinical professor within the Department of Sciences and Mathematics Education here at UT Dallas, specifically supporting the UTeach Dallas program that prepares qualified STEM teachers in school districts. Amin received his Bachelor of Science degree from the University of Texas at Tyler and his Master of Art from the University of Texas at Austin. He boasts a 17-year career as an educator across various levels of the Texas education system, with a focus on building new and in-service teachers' knowledge and competence in mathematics and computer science education. Starting humbly in Palestine High School and Taylor High School, Amin's contributions extends to support teacher training across our district charter schools within the Region 10 of the Texas Education Agency. And so, Amin, welcome to the conversation, and share a little bit about your thoughts of what we've been talking about and what's UTD doing.
Thank you so much, Arthur, for that warm welcome. So what I want to do is just start to talk about what Dr. Tate was talking about. He mentioned that the STEM requirements increased at the high school level. However, that did not impact the college enrollment. And according to one of the slides, it actually impacted the dropout rate disproportionately. I was reading a book by Dr. Ramirez. It was called Save Our Sciences. And she mentions that colleges spend $2 billion. That's $2 billion helping students with math shortcoming. Poor math teaching is costly at so many levels, according to Dr. Ramirez. So what I want to do is talk about Science Math Education Department and what we're doing to support current teachers in the classroom and how we are preparing future STEM educators. There is a shortage of STEM educators, highly qualified STEM educators, and we want to make sure that students have access to those highly qualified educators in their classroom. This way, when they do enter college, or even if they don't enter college, like we were talking about earlier, they are better prepared to be a citizen. Okay. So first thing I want to do is talk a little bit about the UTeach Dallas program. We feel like it's a very innovative way to train future STEM educators. Personally, I went through a program where the very first time that you had to get up and teach was the 4th year of college. In our program, if a student joins the UTeach as a STEM major, the very first course is step 1, where they go into elementary and they teach a computer science, math, or science lesson. They're teaching right away. They can find out if teaching is something they want to pursue. So 1 hour elective to find out if teaching is something that they're passionate about. And if they enjoy step 1, which is elementary, we have them go to step 2, which is their middle school experience. They get to go into middle school and teach a math or science lesson. They're teaching inquiry-based lesson. They're working with students. They're working with students in Dallas ISD, Richardson ISD, Garland ISD, all those local districts. They're working with those students and mentors to figure out if teaching is something they would like to pursue. Now, step 1 and step 2, both 1 hour courses, they're electives. If they at this point say, you know what, teaching is not for me. Teaching is not my thing. It's perfectly fine. It is by design that we've said it this way. So students who continue beyond step 1 and step 2 are really passionate about STEM, because remember, we're recruiting STEM majors. So these individuals want to have their actual science, biology, mathematics. So they want that, but now they're also passionate about teaching. Traditionally, we do it the other way around. We look for individuals that are passionate about teaching. And then we give them the tools, we give them the science and the mathematics. We're saying, let's find individuals that are passionate about the subject knowledge. And once we know that, are they also passionate about teaching? And if they are, then UTeach Dallas is a perfect fit for them. Now, if they enjoy step 1 and step 2, our goal is for them to be a high school certified teacher. But we feel like elementary is the place to start. They learn about classroom management, they learn about pedagogy. And our students, when they go into step 1 and step 2, they are rock stars. They are STEM rock stars, because UTD is diverse. Those kids that are STEM majors are going into Dallas ISD, they're going to Garland, they're going to Richardson. Those kids are seeing kids that are like them, role models that are STEM majors, and we're hoping by doing that, that's creating a pipeline where those students are going, you know what, I can see myself doing that. And now we've got a pipeline where they're coming to us at UTD or somewhere else because they saw someone like themselves being a STEM major. We also have a course called Project-Based Instruction. It's where our students create an entry document where they engage our students in the classroom with authentic projects or maybe an authentic problem. Let me give you an example. An authentic problem could be, why do bridges collapse? Right? That's a global question. Well, now students in groups can actually tackle that problem to look at the history of why bridges collapse. So now we've got the history. Then they look at the physics aspect of it. What is the physics? What's the math behind it? So now we've got the math, we've got the physics, we've got the history. Students are learning all these skills, not in silo, they're learning all those ideas together cohesively. And we feel like when we talk about teaching, that is a better approach, not in silo, but together. The last thing our students to do is the clinical teaching. In clinical teaching, basically it's student teaching where they work with a mentor. Our program supports our students that graduate for at least 3 years. Here's the thing, we've supported some of our students for longer than 3 years. Research shows that students who graduate and go into teaching, if they have the support system, they tend to stay in the system for much longer. We want to create that system where students don't feel like, you know what, I'm done with graduation at UTD, at UTeach, that's it. No, we support you through induction work all the way through, at least for 3 years. So our first graduating class was in spring of 2011. To this date, we've graduated 222 certified STEM educators that are reflective of the population of UTD and our surrounding area. Our graduates have impacted more than 130,000 students. And our retention rate for 5 years is at 85%. The state, according to Texas Education Agency, 68%. So we are creating teachers, STEM educators, who are staying in education longer and having a longer impact on our students. Dr. Tate, in one of your talks, you talked about watching your parents go to work, going to graduate school, and working at the same time. And you said that was a compact event for you. What we want is when our students at UTD from the UTeach program go in and work with elementary, middle, and high school students, by watching them, we're hoping that's a compact event for them that's going to cause them to, again, change their trajectory completely. Maybe that's going to cause them to go into a STEM field before they were even thinking about it, but seeing someone like them has caused them to do that. After graduating, some of our students from our UTeach Dallas program come back and get their Masters of Art and degree through our department. And Dr. Tate, you are quite aware of that because you actually have your master's through our MAT program. So we do support teachers that are in the classroom, and we also prepare future STEM educators. Our UTeach graduates are doing fantastic things. We have students that after graduating only for a couple of years, they are writing curriculum. They're department heads. One of the most exciting things for me is this. We've been here for 10 plus years, which is the UTeach Dallas program. We have students that have graduated through our program coming back and mentoring our freshmen to be future STEM educators. I mean, there's nothing more exciting than to be able to see that. And one last thing I want to talk about is computer science and some of the shortages in computer science in the state of Texas. Here's the thing. We are short in STEM and also CS certification. So what we're doing at UT Dallas within the UTeach program, Math Education Department, we're working with We Teach CS out in Austin to help recruit and to train CS teachers to go into the classroom. Because here's the thing, there's a data that was shared by We Teach CS that says Black and Hispanic students who try AP computer science at the high school level are 7 times more likely to major in computer science in college. So it behooves us for us to make sure that students have access to highly qualified STEM and computer science teachers, and that's what we're doing. So Dr. Tate, I wanted to thank you for coming out and speaking to us. I know that teacher prep is only one part of the puzzle, and I appreciate you coming and talking to us about the equity issues when it comes to STEM. And I'm hoping that we are impacting the system because you said, hey, you know what? We didn't change the system. We just asked for more production. Guess what? I'm hoping we are the system or part of that system that's helping improve that production. And I could not agree with you more. Great teachers do matter.
Awesome. Well, any response, Dr. Tate?
I am just glad that you're my alma mater. I mean, you know, and that, you're doing the things that you're doing right now. There's a long history in that program of adding value to the community and being an excellent disciplinary-based preparation for secondary math and science teachers. And it's just great to see it's continuing. Where I get sad a little bit is that the scope and scale of what needs to actually happen in a place like the state of Texas or the metropolitan region is so significant, and it's that you could probably increase the size and scale of the program there at UTD by 100-fold and still be underserving. And that's a real problem when you think about the explosion of people moving to the region and the extremely high birth rate in light of what the demographers are telling us in the state of Texas and in the metropolitan region of Dallas. And so it suggests by definition, if we just operate on supply and demand, that the supply needs to increase significantly in the metropolitan region, along with what my colleague described as staying with the graduates after they leave the program. Because if people are leaving your field, then your supply chain is just broken. And so it's important that you not only produce, but you have to foster people staying for a longer period of time, and taking it as a win when Amin says that they are staying as curriculum writers or engaged in assessment or becoming leaders. That's actually a win, because those people can take their professional skills and help build them up in those districts. That's the kind of thing that we have to be working on. I think there's a need for something to happen very similar to when we dealt with Sputnik and in the actual competition with the Russians in terms of just thinking about, you mentioned computer science. Let's just talk about algorithmic equality. If you just laid out how many algorithms are being produced regularly that discriminate, like it's off the chain. Like if we haven't even gone into how the CS world and artificial intelligence has built-in biases and the like. How many students are prepared to engage in algorithmic accountability as citizens? Not many. And if you don't have a computer science teacher or those kind of courses or the kind of civic reasoning, there's a question up about the STEM education help with, is it related to people making good decisions? I think everything has to be framed as part of civic reasoning. And the reason I learned math and science or computer science is to understand how to engage the world around me as a citizen and a resident of our community. And partly, if it's not framed that way, you won't be able to have transferable skills. The transferable skills come when you actually learn in the context that replicates more of the factors that are present when you have to deal with it in reality. And so it's imperative, and UTD has always been on the cutting edge, at least when I was there, I knew it, of dealing with the applications that are extremely important in society and bringing that back to the discipline. And so I think that that's something that needs to happen. But just imagine this, UTD is an outstanding institution and its graduates are really good. Not everybody has access to that. And I just want to keep emphasizing when people, you hear people out on, protesting and things of that sort. I saw another question about this. That's a structural problem. And so when people deny that there are structural problems, that's just not true. We have a structural problem just giving people access to a quality teacher that's equivalent to a UTD graduate. And I also want to point out that they ask about someone asked about nurses and the defunding of the police. Look, let me deal with that right now. We stopped putting nurses in schools a long time ago across the United States. We stopped putting social workers in schools. That again, because health is so important, especially mental health, is so important, that if we're not laying that foundation for a solid pro-social, psychologically based schooling scenario where there are nurses, social workers, and the like to help people, then they're going to be likely policed. And so if you're talking about reallocation, the debate can go on and on, but I'm just going to say it like this. Those are things we need because in the positive schools that are really working well, they still exist. But in some schools, they're no longer there.
So, Dr. Tate, real quick, when you talked about the structural changes, who needs to be at the table to better make those decisions?
Well, clearly in the field of education, the state is responsible for the education of the citizens of that state and the residents of that state. And so you need a very, and they give the authority to the local districts to implement. But the partnerships that are needed come from the state, local community agencies who are already working in this space and need to be, double down with school districts. And clearly there's a need for business. Business tends to operate on short-term regimes. They like outcomes that are going to happen within 1 year or two because they're a very, very quick cycle. But the human capital development cycle, the brain regime, is developmental and long-term. And it's antithetical for business people to think I'm going to invest in something into perpetuity. But point of fact, that's exactly what we need them to understand. And the evidence around this investment for creating a strong economy is so robust, it's jaw-dropping. And why would I put all that money in the criminal justice system if I could reallocate money and put it into something that's going to get a pro-social outcome that people are actually going to then be able to pay tax revenue as opposed to being a sucking sound on my taxes? Why wouldn't I do that as a business person? Why wouldn't I want to see that happen? Why wouldn't I want human capital to one of the things UTT brags about, I've seen many of the reports, the huge economic benefit of UTD, right? On the human capital side, business development, the research. Imagine if we thought about our schools more broadly in that kind of language. So what is W.T. White producing? What is Woodrow Wilson producing? And what have we done to invest in it to make sure that production function increases? I keep it that simple if people want to talk in business terms. The cost benefit of that is very clear. I've given you some 2001 numbers. If we don't do it, it's just costing us a ton of money, billions and billions of dollars every year. And so why not get a pro-social outcome if we reinvest and reallocate?
Awesome. Well, I mean, this is an amazing conversation, and there's so much, and I want to thank everyone who submitted questions today, and Amin and Bill, you guys got to come back. We've got to continue this conversation. It's so pertinent and so timely in light of everything that's going on now, and the opportunities that we have to create the future is just amazing. And so we're at that time, and I that's why I hate moderating, because when we get to the end, you kind of want to continue to go further. But I just want to extend a special thank you to our speakers today, to Dr. Bill Tate and Amin Lalani. Your insights, you have challenged us. You have given us some hope and some lessons to work on, and hopefully prepared us to be better in what we do. And so we appreciate all who tuned in and have shared your questions with our presenters. Again, I just want to say this was one amazing presentation of many to come through this program, to Comet Corner, and I'm hoping that you will tell your friends about it and you will share what Comet Corner is about. Hats off to our technical team and producers, to Suzanne Head and Enrica Ziller and Danny Lamb from the Office of Research. And so I would just say be on the lookout across digital channels for the next session in the Comet Corner Series, or other valuable presentations from our out of this world UT Dallas community. We hope you have a great rest of your day. To Dr. Tate, congratulations and well wishes to you on at the University of South Carolina. I understand they say that's the real USC, so I don't want to get into all of that, but congratulations. We are proud that you are an alumnus of UT Dallas and the work that you're doing. Amin, with you teach, thank you for the work that you do. I've known and working on campus, seeing students who have toyed with other majors and gotten you teach, and who are out doing amazing things in our communities and our schools. And so thank you for the work that you're doing and that your office is doing. And we just hope that from this discussion that somebody out there heard what was going on and said, you know, I want to connect into that you teach, or I want to work in my community to be more engaged in the schools, more engaged with supporting our teachers as well as our students. So we got a couple of minutes. Dr. Tate, any few closing words that you'd like to leave us with?
Like I started the conversation with, it's a tremendous honor to have gone to UTC. It was an amazing experience, and it still guides me to this very day. Want to thank Amin for what he's doing. There were a couple of questions about readings. I don't know if you, I don't mind. There's not time to do it now, but if people wanted to email me, that's perfectly fine. I'll gladly share things that I've read that helped inform me of things that I've done. Or you can just Google me if you want to find something that I've written. And love to hear feedback from my fellow UTD alums and community.
And Dr. Tate, when you're in Texas and Dallas, I would love for you to come by so I can show you, kind of give you a tour of the Science Math Education Department and some of the fantastic or wonderful things that we're doing with the We Teach and You Teach Dallas.
Outstanding. Thank you.
Awesome. And as I shared earlier, just warm wishes and regards from Dr. George Fair, our Dean of the School of Interdisciplinary Studies and Vice President for the Office of Diversity and Community Engagement, who's so proud of you and speaks very highly of the work that you're doing. And he thanks you for being here as well.
Well, I had him for cognition in mathematics, and it was an excellent experience. And he served as a bridge for me to continue in my PhD studies. So I'm greatly appreciative of Dr. Fair, a great man and a great teacher.
Well, I think this wraps up our session for today. And so again, thank you for those who tuned in. Thank you again to the technical team. This is a feat. So thank you. And we look forward to seeing you at the next series that we have, the next corner series that we have. So tune in and for Comet Corner, the next Comet Corner session. Thank you all.